Hey everyone, it's Matt here with Night Run Studio, and today we're going to take a look at how to swap characters with a single button press. Let's get started. All you really need to get started is two player characters who are both set up with some sort of a player controller so that you can move them around. I have both of my characters currently using the same player controller, but if you have different ones for each player, that'll work just fine too. What you're going to want to do at this point is head on down into your assets and go to your scripts folder, where you're going to right click, go on up to create, and we're going to create a C# script. I'm just going to call mine player switch. The first thing we're going to want to do is head on up to the top underneath your class, and we're going to have to declare a couple of variables. The first one that we're going to need is simply a reference to your player controller. I'm going to call mine player controller. And then I'm also going to make a reference to my second player controller, which in this case I will call player 2 controller. And the only other variable we're going to need at this point is simply a public Boolean, so a true or false value that will keep track of whether or not player 1 is active. Also, at the start of the game, we're going to want to make sure that that value is set to be true. All right, we don't actually need to run anything in our start function, so if you want, you could actually get rid of it, or you can keep it there in case you're wanting to add something to this script later on. In our update function, we are simply going to have an if statement. This if statement is going to be checking for an input, and it's going to check to see if the key is down. And then in brackets, we're going to go key code, period, and then you're going to pick whichever key it is that you would like to use to make the switch. In my case, I'm going to be doing the right shift. So if I type shift, it actually just gives me right shift right there, and I can hit enter. I'll then hit a open bracket and enter, and down beneath here is where I can write my code. Now you could put all of the code to make this happen right inside of these brackets, but anytime I'm working at a specific function, I like to give it its own separate function. So I'm just going to head down here below the update. I'm going to make this one public in case later on I want to interact with it from another script. Public void, and I'm going to call this one player switch. Don't forget your open and close brackets, hit enter. Now I'm just noticing here that I can't call it player switch because that is also the name of my class. And so instead of player switch, let's make it simply switch player. Which, to be honest, makes a little more sense. When you push the key, you want to switch player. What we'll do down here is we're simply going to go if player 1 is active. You can hit your open close bracket here. Now this is a short form way of writing this. If I wanted to, I could put if player 1 active equals true, and that would accomplish the same thing, but to save time, we can keep it nice and simple and just say if player 1's active, and then type what we want to happen. So the first thing we're going to want to do when player 1 is active and we're switching is we'll want to make player 1 inactive. So we'll type in player controller dot enabled equals false. We'll then head down to the next line where we'll say player 2 controller dot enabled equals true. And then we also want to switch this Boolean value so that player 1 active now equals false, so that the game knows that player 1 is no longer active. Now this will get us started, but we also need to have our else statement, so that if player 1 is not active when you hit switch, and essentially we're going to do the opposite of everything we've done here. So if player 1 is not active when you push your button, we want player 1 to get turned on so that he's able to move again. We'll enable his player controller. We'll turn off player 2's player controller, and we'll let our code know that player 1 is now active. All right, we are just about finished. The only thing left to do is, now that we've created this function down here that switches the player, we actually need to call that function. So that if, anytime you push down, in my case, the right shift button, we are going to call the switch player function. There we go. Let's head back to Unity. All right, so back in Unity, there's just a couple of things that we're gonna do. First of all, I like to keep this separate. We could put all of this code inside our player controller, but I find I don't like having monster scripts, and I really do like having plug and play, easy to use scripts. So I'm gonna head over to my hierarchy here, where I'm gonna right click. I'm gonna create an empty game object, and I'm just gonna call this one player switcher. And then on our player switcher, we're gonna add a component, and this is just where we're gonna put the player switch code. All right, at this point, our code just needs to know which player controllers it's turning off and on. And this part's actually pretty easy. We don't even need to find them necessarily. Our player's controller is on our player game object. So I'm just gonna drag my player game object over here in the box. And you'll notice that it automatically finds his controller. And I'll do the same thing for my second player. In my case, my second player's name is Martin. And I'm just gonna drag him into the player 2 controller. At this point, we're ready to give it a try. So at the moment, you'll notice that when I first start, both players are active, which is not exactly what we want, but when I hit shift, it switches so that now just Martin is active. If I hit shift again, just player 1 is active, exactly the way we want. The only remaining thing we want to do is we don't want both players active at the start. And that's actually a very easy fix. You just find whichever player you don't want active. In my case, it's Martin. You'll head over to his player controller and just disable it. Now when the game starts, he's disabled and my other player is working. He can advance through the level, but he needs a little help from his friend. So I hit shift and now player 2 is in charge. Whoops, he's not very good at jumping. We'll have to work on that. All right, that's all there is to it. Go ahead and give this one a try for yourself.